Hello everyone, my name is Delicacy, and this is Video Delicacies, where we seek to taste the greatest flavors that old games have to offer. I just played RC Helicopter, which was developed by Tomcat System and published by AgeTech. It was among the later games released for the Sony PlayStation. In Japan, it came out in late 2000, about 9 months after the launch of the PlayStation 2. It arrived in North America even later, mid-2002, 19 months post-PS2. You might know it from Classics of Game 33. You know, the one where the little helicopter is taking photos of ghosts like it's in Fatal Frame? That's where I first learned about it anyway. About 2 years ago, I saw a copy of RC Helicopter for sale on the shelf of my local retro game store. I recognized it from that video, and since it was only $4.99, I decided to purchase it. It's sat on my shelf ever since. After playing a couple of high-concept fantasy games for my previous 2 videos, I was in the mood for something a little more grounded. Though not literally, of course, this is a game about flying. I played it on my PlayStation 3 using an original PlayStation black disc. RC Helicopter was very light on plots. Its nameless, faceless protagonist received an RC helicopter as a gift, and they set about using it to perform chores for people around town. But first, they decided to practice flying their new toy. The goal of this first stage was to land on 7 H's around the room. There was no tutorial. To learn the controls, I had to check the manual, which I was fortunate to find included with my used copy. The manual's descriptions were terse, but they were enough to get me started. Movement was performed entirely with the 2 analog sticks. Since early PS1 controllers lacked analog sticks, the game also accepted input from the D-pad and face buttons in their place, though I personally only ever used the sticks. Tilting the right one up or down would raise or lower the helicopter. Gravity would also cause it to descend slowly while off the ground. The meter on the left displayed my elevation. To move forward or backward, I needed to push the left stick up or down. This caused the helicopter to lean in that direction. Moving the right stick left or right would tilt the helicopter to the side, allowing it to move laterally. Finally, moving the left stick left or right would rotate the helicopter. The diagram in the bottom indicated my angle. The horizontal red line moved to show my pitch, while the orientation of the silhouette illustrated my roll. At least, I think those are the right terms. I should maybe disclaim that I'm not much of a flight sim person. I've played maybe an hour of Ace Combat in my life, and longtime viewers of this series will recall that I struggled with the off-rails sections of Star Fox 64. But for these videos, I try to approach each game with an open mind and an earnest intent to have fun, and RC Helicopter was no exception. By default, the camera was attached to a fixed position, inviting me to watch my helicopter from third person the way that someone operating an RC device in the real world would. This was a really fun inclusion, but I could also switch to a more practical angle by pressing L1. Doing so made it easier to find the H marks around the room. The downside of this camera was that it could become disorienting when the helicopter spun out after a crash. A tally in the bottom right showed my progress toward the stage's objective. Once I landed on all of the targets, I was shown this delightful left-aligned message. I was also awarded 1,000 points. Between stages, the game returned me to the protagonist's room. While there, I could change which helicopter I was piloting, though at this point I only had the starting one, Skycat, and I ended up using that for most of the game. Exiting the room led to a cute isometric map screen. From the map, I could go to the RC Helicopter shop where I could buy new machines or upgrades for my existing one. But doing so would have required me to spend points that I didn't have. To earn more points, I would need to play further, and so I went to the garden for stage 2. Here I ran into the protagonist's mother. Characters in this game were represented in this sort of visual novel style with a hand-drawn sprite standing in front of a heavily filtered photograph. She asked me to cut the garden's tall grass using a lawn trimmer attached to my toy helicopter. That sounded like a needlessly dangerous way to solve the problem, but this is the tool that was available to me. There were 50 patches of grass to trim. The clock in the top left displayed how much time had elapsed since I started the level. There was a time limit, though it was not shown explicitly. Instead, I needed to look at the battery icon in the top right, which indicated how much energy my helicopter had left. I would fail the mission if this ever ran out. At this point, that would happen after roughly 3.5 minutes, though the exact time varied a bit based on how much I exerted the helicopter. Below the battery was my HP. Taking damage 5 times was another way that I could fail. The helicopter was able to handle reasonably high impacts while landing, but if the side ever touched anything, even at low speed, it would take damage. For completing this mission, I was given 2,000 points, double what I had gotten previously. However, starting here, damage that I had taken and energy that I had spent were deducted from my income, so I ultimately only earned 800 points. So, I've never piloted an RC helicopter in real life, nor have I had any particular interest in them before now. But this game had such a unique control scheme that it made me curious to know how people actually control them. The back of the box claimed that this game simulates true RC feel, but was that true? Well, according to Pete Carpenter of rc-airplane-world.com, RC transmitters come in 4 different standardized modes. The control scheme used by RC Helicopter the video game seems to correspond to Mode 1. The game did offer a second control scheme, which it called Type B. This one exchanged the left-right functions of the 2 sticks while keeping the up-down functions the same. This seems to be the same as the real-world Mode 3. Interestingly, neither of the game's control options represented Mode 2, which Pete says is the most common one. In this mode, the left-right functions are the same as Mode 1, and it's the up-down ones that are swapped. Stage 3 was called Empty Land. I presume that Empty Land could have been more naturally translated as something like Vacant Lot, but what they went with is very charming. This localization in general makes a lot of very fun choices, like spelling overwrite as 2 separate words and referring to the settings as optionals. Someone standing outside of the empty land was complaining about the litter there, and our protagonist agreed to help out. I needed to find 8 cans and move them to a garbage bin on the other side of the fence. For stages like this one, the helicopter was equipped with a crane. I could press R1 to either pick something up or drop it off. This was the first mission that I failed. On my first try, I ran out of battery after only getting 2 of the 8 cans. The second time around, I did a lot better and got 5 of them, but I was still a long way from success. It seemed like the amount of time that I had was not going to suffice. At the shop, I could buy better batteries. For 2,000 points, I could get a normal battery for about 1 extra minute's worth of energy. For 4,000, I could get a super battery for 2 minutes, or for 8,000, I could get a hyper battery for 3 minutes. I couldn't afford any of them, but I decided to save up for the middle one. To accrue the points I needed, I went back and replayed the first level. To my surprise, I got 1,500 points instead of the 1,000 that I had gotten originally. I assume that this was because I completed it faster this time. It seems that there is a ranking system in the game, though I wish it had been more visible. Getting a letter grade would have been a good incentive to replay stages. I spent 4,000 points on the super battery. However, doing this didn't lower the price of the hyper battery above it. It kind of felt like a waste to buy anything except for the highest tier. Back at the empty land, I realized an important bit of tech. I had noticed on my earlier attempts that cans that landed near the trash rather than going in still counted. This time, I decided to see what would happen if I dropped a can somewhere far away from it. Sure enough, as long as it was on the correct side of the fence, it worked. Not needing to line myself up with the bin saved a lot of time. I did have to be careful of one thing though. If I got too close to going out of bounds, the sides of the screen would aggressively flash red. It wasn't good to look at, and I wasn't allowed to get very far past the fence before it started happening. On this try, I was able to collect all of the cans. If I hadn't upgraded my battery, I think I still would have narrowly completed it in time. Between the 3 attempts of this stage and the 2 replays that I did of stage 1 in between, I was quickly gaining a grasp on the game's distinctive controls. Thanks to that experience, the next couple of stages were easier. Stage 4 was called Beakley. A baker wanted me to chase off some birds that were loitering around her storefront. For this mission, my helicopter was equipped with a water gun. Like the crane attachment, I could use it with R1. All that I needed to do was spray all 10 birds. The one tricky part was that they would return after 25 seconds, so I needed to hit them all successively. Even still, I beat this one first try in under a minute. The next stage was Mark's home. A child had gotten 10 baseballs stuck on his roof, and he needed me to get them down using the wind from my helicopter's propeller. He specified that I couldn't land on the roof, so I assumed that I would be penalized somehow if I let my helicopter get too low. But it turned out that nothing bad happened at all. I guess he was just warning me about the slope. This was another first try clear. Next up was the station. This was one of my favorites. A sweaty salaryman dropped 6 important documents onto the tracks. It was up to me to pick them all up. As with the cans before, the game wasn't picky about where I deposited them, they just needed to make it onto the platform. Unlike the empty land stage though, I was unable to change my view here. I was forced to watch from afar as if I was playing Robot Alchemic Drive. I really liked this camera, it was a fun added challenge, but it was unfortunately a little jittery. The rails were slightly elevated off of the ground, making them easy to run into while flying at low elevation. This was the first time that I failed a mission due to damage. Like I had upgraded the battery before, I had the option to improve my helicopter's body to give it additional HP, though I never did this. I simply played more cautiously on my second try and was able to get all the documents. Due to my diligence though, it took me more than 3.5 minutes, so I probably would have run out of energy if I was still using the starting battery. The next several stages took place at school, beginning outside at the pool. Luckily, getting wet was not a concern. If the helicopter got too close to the water, it merely bounced off the surface. This was another crane mission, but gathering these boards was significantly easier than either the cans or the documents, and so I quickly moved along to the lab room. My task here was to help the teacher clean up some broken glass by blowing it to the floor using the wind from my helicopter. The tables had faucets that I kept running into, but I was able to get this one on my second try. It seemed a little strange that the teacher wanted the glass on the floor. That seemed like a more dangerous place for it to be. Oh, he can vacuum of now. Well, that explains it. At this point, I had 36,000 points, so I decided that it was time to buy the second helicopter, the Sky Bear. This one was supposedly more stabile than the Sky Cat, though that was not my experience. The later helicopters to me felt like higher difficulties. Stage 9 took place in the school's music room. The teacher asked me to take 5 framed pictures scattered across the classroom's desks and place them atop the shelves in the back. This was a narrow target, and if I overshot it, I could easily run into the wall. I couldn't be too cautious though. The last one I put up was a little too close to the edge and it didn't register, so I needed to pick it back up and place it nearer to the wall. By the way, these very cute, very pixelated portraits depicted Johann Sebastian Bach, Ludwig von Beethoven, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Franz Schubert, and Rentaro Taki. I was not expecting to talk about historical composers in this episode. So this game's title when it was originally released in Japan was Simple 1500 Series Volume 53, The Helicopter. The Simple 1500 series was a line of PS1 games which were sold for 1500 yen, or roughly $15 a piece. It was followed by the Simple 2000 series on PS2, which, as you might guess, each sold for 2000 yen. There were a ton of these games, spanning many different genres. If you've ever shopped for Japanese retro games, you're probably very accustomed to seeing them around. To give you an idea of just how ubiquitous they are, when I purchased a PlayStation 2 off of an auction site from someone in Japan a few years ago, they threw in a copy of Simple 2000 series Volume 2 The Party Game free of charge. I believe that's the only Simple game that I had played prior to RC Helicopter. Something that I find interesting about the Simple series is how many different lower budget developers contributed to it. Success, who you may recognize as the maker of Shepherd's Crossing, did several of the earliest Simple 1500 entries. In those days, the series consisted mostly of tabletop game adaptations. Additionally, Sandlot, who you might know from Robot Alchemic Drive, developed the Earth Defense Force games, which started out as a part of Simple 2000 before growing into their own thing. However, Tomcat System, who developed RC Helicopter, was a mainstay. They made a dozen of these across PS1 and PS2, including a submarine game, a surprisingly eclectic board game collection, and most appealingly to me, a lawyer game called the Cybon. I really wish that one had an English translation. After some time passed, the protagonist's mother informed them that their friend would be waiting for them at the school after dark. We're going to be seeing this friend character multiple times, and it's a little peculiar that she didn't get a name. The only character in this game who was named was the baseball kid, Mark. Anyway, my friend said that she needed help getting photos of funny ghosts for the school newspaper. I began my search at the pool. The helicopter now had a camera attachment. There was no fixed perspective available for camera missions. The stage started already in the behind the helicopter view, and pressing L1 would swap to a first-person camera view. From there, I could snap photos with R1, but doing so would expend some battery. Note that the camera could not be aimed independently. It always looked in the exact direction that the helicopter was pointed. A photo wouldn't count unless the ghost was centered, and I also needed to be within a certain distance of it. There were 5 ghosts in all, and they appeared in a cycle. If I missed one, I would have to wait for its turn to come back around, which could be a long while because there would be gaps for the ones whose likenesses I had already captured. This was a more difficult mission than most. After 3 tries, I had failed due to both battery and damage. The Skybear helicopter was not well suited for this job because pressing the left stick forward would tilt its nose down. I would have to wait for it to come back up before the camera could see things in front of it. On my 4th try, I swapped back to the Skycat and found it to be a much better photographer. The following mission was back to the lab again for the game's most classic of stage. My friend explained that there was an invisible man who likes to break things. I guess that explains where all of the broken glass came from the last time I was there. There were 4 glass-breaking ghosts, 1 at each station, and the 5th ghost was a skeleton. As before, any that I missed would come back around on the next rotation. I went in with the Skycat this time, and so I was able to clear it on the first try. After that was a trip to the nighttime version of the music room for 5 more ghosts. Specifically, these were the rectangular apparitions of the 5 famous composers. You know, I compared this to Fatal Frame earlier, but that was actually released a full year after this was. I wonder if RC Helicopter was the first video game to feature ghost photography as part of its gameplay. Oh, right. Never mind. Once I had documented every last ghost, the protagonist received their friend's thanks. And then the credits rolled. I was surprised. I knew that this was a short game, but I really hadn't expected that to be the final stage. There was, at least, a little more for me to do. I returned to the RC Helicopter shop and purchased the final helicopter, the Sky Fox. I then went to the mountain, the first of 2 extra stages that were unlocked after completing the main game. The goal there was to pop 50 balloons using the water gun. The Sky Fox was the most difficult helicopter to control. Like the Skybear, anytime I pushed the left stick to go forward, the front of it would plunge downward. I eventually gathered that the game wanted me to point the helicopter forward like this, and then use the right stick to advance, essentially converting my vertical movement into forward movements. That's a thing that's probably obvious to flight sim veterans, but it took me a little while to figure out since the starting machine had trained me to think of the left and right sticks as horizontal and vertical. Also, the Skyfox could be flown upside down, which was cool. Anyway, this was a pretty boring mission since there were no stakes. The extra stages gave me unlimited body and battery, and I'm not really sure why. The main stages never really required the player to buy any of the upgrades, so it would have made sense to build the post-game stages around them. But instead the game did the opposite and basically invalidated whatever upgrades the player had purchased. The final stage was simply called Extra. This was similar to the previous one, but instead of stationary balloons, I needed to shoot fast-moving UFOs. They were difficult to hit, but again, there was no way of failing. After I completed it, the protagonist declared that the preceding stage had been a dream. This is extremely funny to me. Ghosts exist, obviously, but aliens? Get real. And that was that. I got a message informing me that I had cleared all of the stages and imploring me to enjoy RC Helicopter from now on. The only thing left now was to buy all of the upgrades. Each of the 3 machines had to have their bodies and batteries leveled up independently, and the bear and fox were more costly to improve than the cats. I was just barely short of having enough points to max everything out, so I went back and replayed stage 12 once more for those last few points to purchase the last upgrade for Skyfox. For the first time in this series, I had 100%ed a video game. But, as you may have noticed, there are still 11.5 minutes left of this video. And, well, that's because I have a second game to talk to you about. I just played Simple 2000 Series Volume 35 The Helicopter, which was developed by Tomcat System and published by D3 Publisher. It was released for the Sony PlayStation 2 in 2003. That's right, they made a second one. It was never released in North America, but, as I slightly alluded to earlier, I own a Japan region PS2, and so I was able to play an imported copy. I'm not going to go into as much detail about this game because it had a lot in common with its predecessor. It had a similar UI and the same 2 control schemes, though it required the use of the analog sticks since PS2 controllers had those standard. The 2 games even shared several stages, such as the one where I picked up discarded cans at the empty land. However, they must have realized the garbage bin was misleading as it was absent from this version. The biggest difference from RC Helicopter was what it was like to play in between stages. Rather than selecting destinations on a map screen, the helicopter for PS2 had me navigating an open world in search of the next mission. This was only natural given that Grand Theft Auto 3 had happened to video games in the intervening years. Okay, it wasn't actually a fully open world, it was 3 maps: the house, the shopping district, and the school. These locations were largely vacant, but flying the helicopter remained extremely fun, and it was nice to now be able to do it outside of confined areas and without a time limit. Getting around these spaces was terribly slow at first, which brings me to another of the changes in this game, the expanded shop. There were 3 additional helicopters to buy instead of 2, and each of them had 5 upgradable stats instead of just body and battery. The new stats were engine, gyro, and decal, and stats could now be raised all the way to level 10. Though this game did not fix the issue I had with the previous one where buying any level other than the top felt like throwing points away. The exception, I guess, would be the decals, where each stat level was a different design, but even there, the highest level one was the cutest. Anyway, upgrading my helicopter's engine made navigating the open areas a lot faster. Even though the missions were spread out now, they still needed to be tackled in order. Fortunately, after completing each one, the NPC who gave me the mission would provide a hint as to where to find the next, which was very helpful. By the way, the character art was all redrawn since the PS1 game, and I thought it was pretty nice. I liked the thick outlines. My friend was adorable in this art style. She still didn't have a name though. The text before the colon just says newspaper club member. That covers the major differences between the two games. I want to show you some of the new stages that were added in the PS2 one, but first, let's take a closer look at those boxes. I'll begin with the North American RC helicopter box. It's not great. We have a simple background, a very basic logo, and an image of an RC helicopter that doesn't quite match any of the 3 in the game. Not much to look at here. Now, here's Japan's cover for the same game. The helicopter is the same, though the propeller no longer has a dizzying motion blur applied to it. Also, the helicopter now exists in a particular place, casting a shadow onto a rooftop that has a photo of someone's cat composited onto it. The cat is adorable, but they do not appear in the video game. I wish they had. The vignetting is a bit extreme for my taste, but I can't really hold it against this box in particular since this was universal across the Simple series. Next, let's move on to the PS2, starting with the version of the helicopter that I have. This one also features a cat photo, though this cat is walking around town. Incidentally, this is actually pretty accurate to the game. There was a stage where I needed to spray water to chase stray cats away from the shopping district's parking lot. This cover is nothing particularly amazing, but it is probably my favorite of today's boxes. There's also an alternate version of it, where the game was packed in with Simple 2000 Series Volume 37 The Shooting, Double Shienryu. I don't envy the designer who got this job, but given what they had to work with, I think it looks fine. By the way, Double Shienryu is itself a compilation of 2 vertical shooting games originally released in arcades. It looks pretty cool, but it has a wildly different vibe from the helicopter. It's funny that these 2 were paired together. Finally, the helicopter was released in Europe under the title Radio Helicopter. It's certainly a striking cover with its bright oranges and yellows and its reflected silhouette. I wouldn't say I care for it though, and my biggest problem is that, apart from the title, there's nothing here to indicate that this is a toy. Without a cat around to offer a sense of scale, it would be easy to mistake this for a full-sized helicopter. My first failure in the PS2 game happened in this stage where I needed to chase 8 frogs into a pond. Perhaps due to the overall number of upgrades being increased, the helicopter's starting body and battery were worse than in the earlier game. It only had 3 HP, and it would run out of energy after 3 minutes. On my first try of the frog pond level, I ran out of time, but I was able to get it on the second try without much trouble. By the way, the character who gave me this mission was a smoker. I suppose that explains why this game never came to the US. The following mission featured another new NPC, a firefighter. You might assume that this was going to be a water gun stage, but that was not the case. The goal here was to carry gas masks up to people trapped inside of a burning building. The scary looking people in this stage made me grateful that humans were not generally represented by 3D models in these games. There were 6 windows, and only one of them could have a person in it at a time. After a short while, a survivor would re-enter the building and be replaced by flames. I would then have to wait a short while for someone to appear in one of the other windows. At times, it felt like they were intentionally disappearing just before I could get to them. And even when I did get the gas mask to someone, it was very easy to just run into them and take damage after making the delivery. After failing this one 3 times, I decided that I was ready to buy some upgrades. I raised my body and battery stats to level 6, and then returned and beat it on my next try. This game's first pool mission was a lot more memorable than the previous games. Instead of collecting boogie boards, I was gathering swimsuit tops. I then needed to drop them in front of the swimmers who had lost them, though there were only 3 swimmers and 8 swimsuits, so I guess they were wearing multiple each. After getting the 3 in the pool, I was briefly confused about what I was intended to do next, but then I noticed the remaining swimsuits atop the nearby trees and umbrellas. My time on this one was over 4.5 minutes, so this probably would have been difficult if I hadn't upgraded my helicopter's battery. One notable thing about this stage is that, questionably, it appears not once but twice on the back of the game's box. You know, I'm beginning to think that I might be demographically outside of the intended audience. The helicopter had 15 stages that were required to reach the ending. Like the PS1 game, it had a series of ghost photography missions, but this time those were saved for after the credits had rolled. Also, the mechanics of them were slightly different this time around. Rather than the camera consuming the helicopter's battery, it had a fixed 10 uses, so I needed to take extra care to have a good shot before snapping. This was a much better post-game than the balloon and UFO stages had been, and it wasn't over yet. The next stage was a water battle against some rival helicopters, though it was hardly a fair fight since they only had 1 HP each. The most interesting thing about this one was the attire of the NPC who presented it. After that was an obstacle course on the school's field. This one demanded a lot of precise movement. I spent longer on this stage than any of the others in either game, but that's not saying much given that most of them were only a couple of minutes long. Finally, I want to thank YouTube user Isolar1313 because I never would have known that this last stage existed without their long play of the European version of this game. So each stage was accessed through a star somewhere in the world, and they were normally in plain sight. But the last one was hidden in a flower bed behind the protagonist's home back at the very start of the game. It was just barely visible there. This one took place in a cave that was scrolling toward me to give the impression that the helicopter was flying through it. There were obstacles to avoid and health and energy pickups to collect, but the only objective was to see how long I could survive. It was very different from the rest of the game and not especially exciting. And that was it for the helicopter. I didn't bother buying everything in the store this time. Both of these games were very brief. Completing RC Helicopter for PS1 only took me 1 hour and 21 minutes. Then my final time after the extra stages and buying all upgrades was 1 hour and 44 minutes. On the other hand, completing the helicopter for PS2 took me a slightly lengthier 1 hour and 54 minutes. My final time with that one after its post-game was 2 hours and 40 minutes. These aren't the most ambitious games. They are, by design, small-scale affairs for consumers on a budget, but the world needs those. It needs games of all sizes. So I love to be whisked away to a fantastical world and told grandiose stories like anyone else, but sometimes it's refreshing to play a game that disposes with all that artifice and has the bravery to admit that toys are fun and we all love to play. A game that takes quaint quotidian spaces and lets us live out our daydreams in them. These helicopter games, with their mundane trappings, feel connected to the primal truth that to play a video game is, fundamentally, to play with toys. And I love them for that. But now, it's time for the rankings. I did complete 2 video games this episode, but in the interest of keeping the list uncluttered, I'm only going to be ranking the first one, RC Helicopter. How does it compare to the 14 other games that I've played for this series? This is not a decision that I need to agonize about. RC Helicopter is going to take the number 15 spot at the bottom of the list. It's a cute game that I truly enjoyed playing, but there's very little to it. I got my $5 worth, sure, but if I had spent 1,500 yen on it back in the year 2000, I might have been a bit underwhelmed. Don't misunderstand, some of my favorite games can be beaten in an hour or 2, but those games tend to be more replayable or to excel in other areas like soundtrack. Simple 2000 series Volume 35 The Helicopter was a slightly more robust experience. If I was going to rank it, I would certainly put it above RC Helicopter, but it still didn't rise to the level of a Shepherd's Crossing or a Getter Love for me. By the way, I recently played a multiplayer game of Getter Love with some friends and had a blast, so I'm happy to see it no longer in last place. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Video Delicacies. I'm really enjoying playing a variety of different games for this series. I'm not really sure how large the audience will be for a video talking about RC Helicopter, but if you're in the group that enjoys hearing about games like this one, please let me know by pressing the like button or by leaving a comment. And if you'd like, you can support me on Patreon to help me continue making videos about all sorts of games in the future. To those of you who already do, you have my deepest gratitude. It really means a lot to me. In the next installment of Video Delicacies, I'm going to be returning to the Nintendo DS for the first time since episode 2. I hope you'll look forward to it. Until then, fly safe.